But first, the final passage of the voice referendum legislation through the Parliament indicates just how difficult and how divisive this whole process has become. Now, sure, large majorities in both houses supported the legislation, though not necessarily because they support the voice, but because they want the voice to be put to the people's vote. But how can people be expected to vote yes to something when all the details are then subsequently to be worked out by the Parliament? A blank cheque like never before for something as important as our nation's founding document, its rulebook, the Constitution. Trust the politicians. That's what the Yes campaign are asking us to do. At a time when trust in politicians is not exactly high, well, that's a big risk indeed. Especially when the Prime Minister, from the very beginning, has treated this as a political weapon rather than an exercise in consensus building, as constitution making used to be. Unlike past practice, Anthony Albanese has not held a constitutional convention. He's not given both sides a fair go. He orchestrated a sham of a parliamentary inquiry into the bills, and he's not given the opposition any real input into the process. With opinion polling for The Voice last week falling below 50% for the first time, a lot of Voice supporters, so this is the Yes camp, well, they're starting to point the finger at Indigenous Affairs Minister Linda Burney for the slump in the polls. The Australian's political editor and Credlin regular Dennis Shanahan has said today that after another torrid question time, when Burney was asked for detail on what the Voice could and could not do, and basically just accused the opposition of picking on her, that the minister must, he said, radically improve her sales pitch. Now here she is, you be the judge.
Should the Voice be able to make representations to the Chief of the Defence Force on military acquisitions or the location or operation of military bases?
And I can only repeat what I have already said, is that the Voice will make representations that affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It will not be giving advice on all of the ridiculous things that this side has come up with.
And if the Minister for Indigenous Australians cannot answer it, she could choose to hand the question.
Given that the Minister is responsible for the working group and the people on that working group, does she agree with Mr Mayo's statements?
I am not responsible for what other people say, but I tell you what I'm responsible for. I'm responsible for what I say and what I do. At the end of the day, this is about doing things differently so that we can move the dial on a national shame in relation to the issues that the Voice is responsible for. I can only make this point. It does not have a capacity to fund anything.
She was on her feet time and time again, shaky, not across the detail. Almost every answer, you saw it there, had to be read off a pre-prepared bit of paper. Yeah, this is the biggest issue she's got on her desk. This is the biggest issue she'll ever have on her desk, and she lacks the confidence to sell it. Now, any wonder it's in trouble. But in fairness to Burney, the problem's not the sales assistant, it's the product. It's the product. Maybe the Assistant Minister, Melandiri McCarthy, well, she'd be more credible because she's at least spent most of her life in outback Northern Territory rather than in and around Sydney where Burney's been. And the Voice is supposed to be a solution to Indigenous disadvantage, not just another gravy train for the activists. But I doubt anyone could credibly sell anything that is supposed to be as radical as this Voice is. On the one hand, no big deal, we're told, just being gracious to First Australians, says the Prime Minister. Well, on the other hand, it's all powerful, says key advocates. It's all about ending 2 centuries of disadvantage. What's hurting this Yes camp is the suggestion that ordinary people, and they're picking it up, that for them to ask questions about the Voice, legitimate, honest questions, that somehow makes them a racist. Now, this is what Troy Bramston, normally I regard a credible commentator, said in The Australian today. He said it's now up to every citizen to discuss and deliberate with goodwill and to call out the fear-mongering and misinformation by those opposing it. Now let that sink in. If you've got goodwill you must vote yes. But if you vote no, you're fear-mongering. You're spreading misinformation. Again, it all comes back to an attempt at moral intimidation by the yes camp against those who will vote no or at this stage are undecided. It's basically a local version of Hillary Clinton's attempt to label everyone who failed to support her as some sort of basket of deplorables. Well, they're not. Especially my viewers know that. There's a radical fringe to this yes push, and they want to see 96% of us pay the rent to the 4% who argue they were wrongly dispossessed.
You know, this is the first step. It's a vital step. Pay the rent, for example. You know, how do we do that in a way that is transparent and that it actually sees reparations and compensation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
The power in the voice is that it creates the ability for First Nations to go forth with coherent positions on what legislation needs to be created, what legislation needs to be amended, and punish politicians that ignore our advice.
Even though but for the settlement of this country, there'd be no Australia as we know it. And what it is today is the result of the hard work and sacrifice of so many settler and migrant, convict and free, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. All of us here now and those who came before us, well, rightly, we all have an equal stake in modern Australia. Now, I've been around politics a long time. This debate's going to get rough, but the only way to avoid that is for the Prime Minister to admit that he's gone too far too fast and pull this vote. Sadly, that won't happen.